Jeffrey St Laurent here for the Tuesday Call. We're rocking and rolling today with giving some strategies on how to become comfortable with public speaking. And like I said, I was talking with some people beforehand, and this topic is one, public speaking. It could be anything. Like the call that I'm doing right now, we can consider that public speaking. It's obviously a different format because you're not directly in front of people. In the virtual world now, video conferencing, being a leader of, like, say, group coaching event or even a telephone class, whether there's 1 or 100 people on it, video conferencing, things like that. And then, of course, there's actually, if you will, the traditional public speaking where you're actually out in front of people, and no matter what size audience. And obviously with different size audiences, bring different thoughts or fears or things you can or can't do as effectively with different size audiences. But in general, it's how do we get comfortable in front of these people, and most importantly, comfortable enough where we can deliver an effective message. Because as I've said many times, is public speaking or seminars for that matter is the best way. By far, a live event, face to face first, and then anything else after that, like a live event like this on the phone or something like that. But face-to-face live events are the best way of getting clients for many reasons. I actually have a recorded call in my Selling Coaching University where I kind of talked about, how to use seminars to basically get paying clients. And so if you want to go check that out, like I said, all my calls are recorded. So we have that, like I said, my website, sellingcoaching.com. If you go into the university, that's where you can access all of the recorded calls. So if you want to know more about kind of the thoughts behind that, you can check out that call and many more. And then while you're there, before we get started, just so you can see at the top of my website, there's a link to my private Facebook group. And if you're not already in that, definitely check that out. I'm going to be referencing some of the things we're doing in there today as well. Like we do a visibility challenge where we challenge people to create 30 videos over 91 days. And again, that's just another way of helping them practice honing their message. And that's a great segue kind of into what we're talking about today is, if I could cut the call short and stop now and I had, 30 seconds to basically give the strategies on, how to become comfortable public speaking is practice, right? I mean, you've got to practice, you've got to get out and do it. And I mentioned that visibility challenge, and I know some of you that are on the call are participating in that or have done videos before. And one of the reasons why I do the visibility challenge of creating those videos, and even like Lillian for you on the call, my mentoring clients, one of the first things I'm saying with them early on, when we mentor together, is like, okay, well, let's get you on video. Just pop in front of the video camera and just start speaking your message. Just say your name and say who you're helping with what specifically, and then just talk about it a little bit and start to see what comes out. Don't script it, don't plan it, just start to see what comes out. And that's why I want to start getting people early on developing their message is I just want you to start seeing what comes out of you. And when you're in that natural, authentic space, that's typically when the best content can come out of you. Typically when we start to script and plan too much, then we're not allowing our free-flowing creativity to come out. And whether you think you're creative or not, we all have parts of us that we start to access when we get into what people might call a zone, right? A zone, like as an athlete, right? When they say, oh man, he or she, they're in the zone. It's like you can't touch someone when they're in a zone. It's like they're unconscious. They're just accessing a place that's it's free-flowing. They're not thinking about things. They're just allowing, and I use that word purposely, they're just allowing things to happen. And they're free-flowing and they're going with energy, and it's kind of unexplainable. They don't even know how it happens. And if you ask them, how did that happen, they wouldn't know. If they asked them to do that again, they couldn't. It's a situationally dependent place. And a lot of public speaking is trusting yourself, trusting and allowing yourself to get to that space. But the only way we can do that is by trusting it, and that frees us up from that fear. And we trust that what's supposed to happen will happen. And obviously, the more we do that, the easier it is to trust, right? But it's easier to trust when we have experience, right? When we have the data, when we have the results, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I've done this X amount of times before, and here's what's happened. Then, it's easier to trust. However, now we're asking, it's like, well, how do we begin to develop that trust so we can get the experience, so we can get that practice in there? And then going back to what I said about like the visibility challenge, that's where it begins. It begins with just permission to say like, okay, I don't care what comes out, just no one's watching this anyways. Let me just talk and see what happens, and expect that I'm not gonna like this. It's not gonna be pretty. Who cares what it is? Let me just throw it out there. And that's the first step. Part of the importance of, for instance, like posting a video like in the selling coaching group that I have, the reason why I like to create that platform and give it to the people, the coaches who are looking to do this, is because the next spot is anyone can do it behind the scenes and keep it private. Anyone can write a book, but not everyone can publish a book, meaning get it out there in the public, because that's the step that makes it real. Anyone can sit and write something on the computer or in their journal, their thoughts and ideas, but when you publish it on paper and you put it out there, that makes it real. When you record your voice and your thoughts and yourself, it's one thing, but when you put it out in the real world, that's what makes it different. And a lot of the fears we have around it, and no one's going to like me. What do I have to say that's valuable? Who's going to benefit from this? We all know if we challenge those and we work through them, that it's a bunch of BS. It's things that aren't true, or things that you haven't had experience enough to know that they're not true. But everyone knows that if we logically talk through those fears, that they're very irrational and they're not truth. But we sometimes allow those to overcome us. And so I'll start to talk about maybe some just more black and white things right now that are just going to help maybe settle some of you to get you to that spot. And the first thing I always like to say is, and this is a strategy that I've used, is you've got to start to understand yourself and how you work. And everyone is, I would say everyone's very different. People are unique in the ways that they are able to access their information, right? So access that inner genius, access, like I said, in that zone, being in that moment. We've got to find ways that suit us so that we can put ourselves in that situation and getting ourselves out there. One of the things that I found has worked for me, and also a lot of entrepreneurs, clients that I've worked with, is typically I've got to set the event up first, meaning that if I have to like prepare a speech, or if I can think about what I'm going to say before the event is booked, number one, I don't know who my audience would be, right? So I don't know who I'm speaking to. And so therefore, how am I going to really know what I'm going to say? But then for me, there's no pressure. There's no stimulus to be like, okay, I've got to do this. Where like part of the reasons, for instance, I do these Tuesday calls, and they're every Tuesday, is I have that stimulus, meaning I've got the Tuesday call. So if I don't have a topic, by Monday, I've got to come up with it sometime by Monday. It's that pressure to get it out there, to promote for the call, and just, in other words, market and say, hey, I've got the Tuesday call and here's the topic. And that forces me to get out there. It doesn't matter what type of mood I'm in, or how my day is, or how I'm feeling, by 11:30, quarter to 12, I've just got to get myself in the game and ready to go, because I've got people coming in and I've got the call. So that pressure allows me to focus. So I'm definitely ADD. I've been diagnosed ADD. I'm not just saying that. Like sometimes people joke around. And I find a lot of entrepreneurs are ADD in like I said, a diagnosed way, whether they're taking medication for it or not. And I find ADD to be actually a great gift, because there are certain times certain kinds of ADD where creating a stimulus like a live event actually allows things to slow down. So if you know that you have, when I say ADD tendencies, or if you are diagnosed with having ADD, live events might be your best friend, because there's a certain stimulus that comes along with a live event. You're sitting in front of people, or people on the call, or on a webinar, or whatever the live event we're talking about. And that stimulus alone allows you to focus. And otherwise, without that stimulus, it can be very hard to focus. So if I don't have that stimulus, for me, it's just like I don't have a focus, and I tend to wane and wander. And so what I find to do is that's strategies to get myself focused is I'll book events. I'll book things that have deadlines. I'll put my word on the line, or I'll promise to people and say, yes, I'll get it to you by then. And I find out, when I work better in that last minute. And I'm sharing this stuff not just because it's myself, but I find a lot of people in the entrepreneurial world work better like this, in those last minute things. So find out when your deadlines are, especially when it comes to speaking and setting those engagements up. Have some type of recurring weekly live event, whether it's a Facebook Live, webinar, meetup group, call like this. There's a lot of other different examples, but those are some of the main big ones right there that provides that stimulus for you. So someone who works on the opposite spectrum, who's going to be more planned, and in other words, they want to control their environment more. That could be a tough situation for live events. Doesn't mean it's impossible, because there's a lot of things you can plan and prep for with the events, and especially after you do enough of them, you'll know some things that can or will go wrong that you can prepare for. So if they do go wrong, you don't freak out and lose everything. You've made like contingency plans for everything, and in some cases double contingency plans. So even just that alone makes you feel safe and secure. And so if you find that you're more of a logistical person, and oh my God, and you freak out about, well, what if this goes wrong? What if I forget what I'm going to say? What if the PowerPoint goes out? What if my microphone dies? What if whatever? What I'd say is okay, if it really bothers you that much, we could just say, well, the odds are it won't happen. But if that doesn't work for you, then okay, let's create actually a list. And here's a strategy. Create a list of all the things that freak you out, and all the things that are like that actually could happen. So PowerPoint going out, microphone, anything like that. Forgetting this, forgetting that. And so if you create a list of that and you say, okay, what's the contingency plan? In other words, if this were to happen, what do I have set as a backup? And one of the speakers I worked with, he had, like for instance, his computer. He had his laptop. He had a backup laptop. He had a backup drive, and he had his notes printed. So it's like, and he had a battery backup as well. So if they lost power or his battery died, he would have another battery backup as well. And so it's just like when he had a speech prepared and he used PowerPoint with it, it didn't matter whether they lost power, one computer died, another computer died, he had another backup hard drive. I mean, contingency, he's never been in a situation where he's had to, exhaust all those. And even if he did, worst case, he would have his notes. So it's like there's just no way you're getting through all those walls. Even microphones, he's had backup microphones of his own. Even in hotels, sometimes it's crummy. So he had a backup microphone and a wireless, a speaker system that you could plug into the wall that he could hook his microphone up to if either he didn't like the sound in the room or the microphone just failed or didn't work. So those are all the things like that, for instance, he did that made him feel safe and made him feel good about the event and know that it was going to work exactly the way he planned it would work. And so I'm giving that example for you to say, just honor how you're at. Again, that's the big overall strategy is you've got to understand how you work and honor those spaces. Because if you don't honor those spaces, it's just going to make it more challenging for you to do that. It might require more prep time for certain people. But again, like I said, the reason why I'm talking about this, as I go back to ultimately, is public speaking, live events like this, especially face-to-face, are going to be the number one way you're going to start to build an audience and especially getting clients. And that's why this is a vital thing, that you don't want an irrational, or even let's just call it a rational fear. Like a rational one, meaning one that is very rational. Let's say there are ones. We don't want that coming in the way of us not doing this. So we want to start to know that. I talked very early on and saying, hey, if I could do this in 30 seconds, and I say practice and know your stuff. And that would be the biggest thing. But when I talk about practicing, like just to elaborate on that a little bit, because you might say, oh yeah, okay, Jeff, I got to practice. But work on your craft. This is the biggest thing, is work on your craft. A few people before the call, they're like, I want to really be able to convey my message and get my point across, things like that. There are some things you can start to do in terms of conveying your message. Start speaking to people, even if it's one-on-one. Ask them if they understood what you're talking about. Even children sometimes, practicing in front of them, and asking them, what did I say? Um, what what did you understand? Tell me about that. Tell me a little bit more about that. See if they can articulate and talk back to you what your points are. Practicing out loud, that's a big piece to this. Like, if you're going to be, I can't tell you how many speeches I've done where I was like in my office, like by myself, like, talking out loud, and then my son's like outside the door or whatever, and then afterwards he's like, Dad, why do you talk to yourself all the time? And I'm like, oh no, I'm practicing, for my speech that I'm giving. Or sometimes I'd give the speech and I would do it in front of him, even if he was playing there, or having another person in the room. If I got family over, or my girlfriend's over, like I would talk, and I would talk in front of that person or those people, even if they weren't listening to me at all, and they're just going about their day. And obviously I, tell them, hey, listen, I got to practice this. Just go about your day. Don't worry about me. But it might sound silly, but the reason I'm telling you those things is because I've done those things and they've worked, because there's something about having someone else in the room while you're talking, right? It's different than by yourself, because you can mess up by yourself. You can stop, you can, oh, what was I thinking? You can go check your notes. You can do all that stuff. But when there's someone in the room, even if it's a child or whoever, it just brings the brings the live energy. Now it becomes a live event, whether they're paying attention or not, or who it is. So that type of practice is very, very important, and that's going to allow you to hone your craft. The next thing I'll say too is just start to recognize that, if I'm doing this enough, is that, what you have to say is valuable, and no matter how you get it across. Doesn't mean you can't stink, right? Doesn't mean you're not going to be horrible. The reality is there are poor public speakers. There are people that just are a bore to listen to. So I'm not saying that to scare you, but we've all been there. You've had a speaker, and maybe the content was okay, and maybe they would just put you to sleep, or they were just slow, whatever. You're not going to appeal to everybody. It doesn't mean you have to be this magnificent public speaker. However, so you do want to recognize that, yeah, the reality is that you can suck. So you don't want to, and therefore that's why it's important to, take the time to hone your craft and practice. And the more I say about speaking out loud is when you begin to speak out loud, and recording yourself, that's probably one of the best things to do. So what I have you do, and I've done this many times, and I did this a lot when I was in the fitness industry, with instructors and training. Because with fitness, part of it is movement and quality of movement, and execution, because you're a visual role model for your participants, let's say in your class. So same thing here is, and this is another reason I go back to that visibility challenge in my private Facebook group of creating the videos. When you video yourself, and again, it might feel weird of throwing a video camera up and presenting to the video camera, or have someone in the room just doing whatever they're doing, and then just present to the video camera. Again, it creates that live stimulus, and it creates a real live situation. And you've got to be able to create that stimulus where you can begin to practice, especially if you're nervous. Can you get through your event or your talk in that situation? And then the sometimes very painful part is actually watching yourself on video. And I will tell you, there are very few people that will actually do what I'm saying right now. And I've done this many, many times. And it's been one of the most valuable things I could have ever done, is watching myself on video and just critiquing myself, just finding parts that I like, that I don't like. Where am I using a lot of filler words? Where am I very unclear? Where do I tend to go off on tangents? And as I bring up the word of filler words and tangents and things like that, one thing I want to bring up is that with public speaking, sometimes there's a tendency to go towards that, like, oh, the ideal public speaker. And there's a TED Talk, right? And we watch some TED Talks and these different talks where the speakers are just like, wow, they're great speakers, and they're so eloquent. They have no filler words. There's great, pregnant pauses. And, they tell great stories and, all this stuff. What I found, though, is that there's nothing wrong with that, and that's fantastic. And if you can go towards those levels, it's fantastic. There's also something, though, that's real, meaning sometimes there are filler words. Sometimes you do talk a little bit too fast. Sometimes you do tell a story, 5 different ways to get your point across. Sometimes you do go off on tangents. However, if you start to understand that about yourself, and you're getting points across. And sometimes you can even call yourself out on some of that stuff, even in live events. Is okay, I got to go off on this tangent here, but even if you go to a person, can you please remind me of where we're at? Talking about X, Y, and Z, but I have to tell you this quick story. Or if you get excited and you're talking too fast, go with it a little bit, and then stop for a minute and be like, man, am I talking too fast? Did you just understand a word that I said? Or, and kind of laugh, and some people will laugh. And then I just like to be in that moment and be like, okay, well, what did I say? And call on somebody, and get some interaction into your audience, especially if it's a live face-to-face. That's the power of a live event. Live events aren't duplicatable. I'm doing this training right now for a health club out in Texas, and they've been a client of mine for many years now. I've done a lot of stuff. I've been out there, met them through a speaking engagement I did. I met the owner. God, it was probably 7 years ago plus now at this point, and I'm doing some sales training for the front desk staff. And we did a training, maybe 2 months ago, and we had about 8 people, and it was a live phone conference training. Basically, I'm on speakerphone, and there's like 7 or 8 of them in the room, and we go from there. And then they got a couple new employees, so we just ran the training last week, and it was basically the exact same topic. They wanted me to kind of go over it again. And the funny part is like it was the same training, but it was just in the moment. I had like 5 or 6 bullet points, and to the ear, in listening, it was a completely different training, but we covered the same concepts. But it was just refined, and it was in the moment. And that's why when I say that, that's what I would urge you. That's what I want a live event to be. If I did this call again tomorrow on the same topic, on how to strategies to become comfortable with public speaking, I guarantee it would be completely different. I might have the same thread, some of the, maybe a same story here and there, but what happens is I get into that moment and I allow the thoughts to flow. And as long as you can start to tell a sequential story or tie things together, that's through experience and starting to understand and knowing where you're at and where you're going with it, or keeping your main ideas intact. That's where that live event really comes from. Is it's in the moment, and you can't duplicate it. You can record it, right? But you can't duplicate it because of the people there, the energy, the time, the space. And that's where, going back to tying it into, if you are too scripted, that's where it can kind of pull away from having those spots, because you're so always conscious about, oh, I've got to get this, or I've got to get this point across. And that's where if you can kind of, know your points and flow from there, that's a much better way to go. Like I said earlier about getting into that zone. But either way, starting to know yourself, and then with a couple things about how you work best, the planning and the prep, or maybe like off the cuff, having a topic and going. Either way, one of the things I like to do when I'm speaking, or when I'm going into a space to speak, is I like to find out, what is it that the person or persons that I'm going in to speak to, what are they looking for? What are they hoping to get out of this event? Whether it's a paid event, or especially if it's a paid event, or as most of us will speak, the majority of our events will most likely be complimentary or free events. And those are great events, because those lead to getting people in the seats and building your audience, and you can get clients out of that. That's where we get paid for those free events. But either way, it's like I always like to say, sometimes it's hard to know, especially if you're starting off, like, well, what do I talk about? That's probably the biggest question. What do I talk about? Where do I go with this? I always tell people, and especially people that I'm mentoring with, when I help them, strategize their events and, create an agenda and a plan for their events so it will work for them. And also we want to think about, how do we create an event where we market ourselves and get the most out of it in that respect. But from a content perspective, we want to start to understand is I like to just ask the people. I almost like let the organizers tell me exactly what they want me to talk about. And so I coach them and say, well, who's going to be in the audience, and what are they expecting? What are you hoping to get from the event? These are the types of questions I'll ask the person, whether it's face-to-face, if it's a local event, or if I'm on the phone with them typically. And, so what are you hoping to get from that? What would you want your participants walking out of the event saying? What would you want them walking out have learned? Do you see the event? Where do you see it lying in terms of, interaction and activities versus just more of a lecture type thing. What have you done in the past? What's worked well? What's gotten the most response, from people you've brought in before, if anybody? What do they like the most? Anything like that. And I'm just shooting off a bunch of different questions. I don't have a list of questions that I'm asking, but these are the general things that I like to understand. And then as they start to tell me a little bit more, and they say, hey, you know what, Jeff, I want to learn X, Y, and Z, and this, and this. As I start to have ideas, I'll run those ideas by them, and I say, so if I were to talk about mindset here, if I were to talk about the power of choice, if I were to talk about X, Y, and Z, how does that tie into with what you're looking for? Oh my God, that would be great. And so I kind of almost like get approval, and so I can almost walk away from that phone conversation with an outline. All right, I can have almost an outline, and then I can start to fill in the blanks. And a lot of times, the reason I'm bringing this up is because that alone can start to make you less nervous, less fearful, because now wow, this is what they're looking for. I got it right from their mouths, and you even kind of gave some of your ideas on what you might be talking about or what you could talk about, and they've kind of said, yeah, that would be fantastic. And so, and I've even gone back via email and saying, hey, I've come up with a few things here, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, this, and this. And a lot of the times, they give you feedback and they'll say like, oh yeah, we're looking for this, or you know what, we actually had someone talk about that a little bit, but if you could focus on this, that would be really great for us. And I always pose that as if basically saying, the reason I'm going back and forth is I can just come in there with a presentation and do what I do. However, I like to custom tailor my events to exactly what you're looking for. And that right there, that mindset, people appreciate that. They're not saying like, wow, this guy doesn't, or this girl doesn't know what the heck they're doing, or they're supposed to be a speaker, yet they're just kind of asking us all these questions. It's more of like, wow, they're trying to find out really exactly what we're looking for, and they're tailoring, their talk to exactly what we're looking for. And that helps, I know that helps me go in there feeling confident in my material, and just be a lot less nervous because I know this is exactly what they're looking for. And then afterwards I follow up and they're like, wow, you hit all the points that we're looking for. And that's a really great piece of it. One of the last strategies I'll give, before I open the call up for just a little Q&A would be, especially any live event, like a call like this, things like that, is just plan your time out. A lot of the times, even if you're talking off the cuff, like this call I do, like I said, I have a topic, I might have a few bullet points I want to think about ahead of time, but then I go and I just want to be in that moment, and I want to see where the call goes. I want to see almost what comes out of my mouth from that point, but I also have some type of a structure planned, and that's helpful for keeping things on track. So for instance, this call, how I format it is, I've got the first 10 minutes or so where I interact. The call today, actually, we spent almost about 20 minutes interacting. There were less people on the line, and I just took the opportunity to I wanted to converse more. It allowed that space, so I took the extra time to do that. But typically, it's about 10 minutes of interacting, about 40 minutes of content where I deliver something like this, and then about 10 minutes or so of question and answer. And it's give or take 5 minutes here and there, but that's kind of like the flow of how it works, and it starts to break it down. Other people and clients that I work with and mentoring and helping them with their weekly something that we want to set up for them. It's just, coming up with a format. Is it an interview format? Do they have guest speakers? Do they deliver content like this? Do they have an open Q&A forum? There's lots of different formats that you can start to come up with. And when you have those formats, it starts to take the pressure off. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And how's this going to work? Even live events, when you're going in, is know how much time you have. I've got 30 minutes, I've got an hour, and typically in the beginning, a 30-minute talk could just feel like, oh my God, 30 minutes. I remember when I started speaking, it was like 30 minutes, it would freak me out. Like it would freak me out. I was like, how am I going to fill 30 minutes? And now like you could put me in front of like 1,000 people and give me a topic, I could probably do 3 hours like just off the cuff. But that's just from doing it. You know what I mean? And so but I know in the beginning, it's just like 30 minutes just feels like this eternity. So, but no matter what it is, the 2-hour time frame, break it down. What I like to do with my clients is like, look at it. Okay, you got 30 minutes. Let's break this down. Do a little introductory story. Think about that as like 5 to 7 minutes. And then, let's go into like 2 main points. and each point tell a little story and then deliver the impact. And you do that twice, and all of a sudden you're at like a 25-minute mark. And then all of a sudden, the last 5 minutes, what's your closing story? And boom, there's 30 minutes. And if you go into it and you break it down, it's like, wow, that actually can go pretty quick. You could take that same 30-minute talk with the same exact points. You could make it an hour talk, and you could have, your 5 to 7 minute introductory story or whatever, and kind of outlining what you're going to do or what you're talking about, create some impact. You could take those same 2 points, maybe just add a third point, and instead of just delivering like an impactful story and then, what is your main point, after you do that for each one, do an open dialogue or do an open, not a Q&A, whatever, but like, what did you receive from that? Or do a quick little activity where you break people into pairs or something like that, and they discuss for 2 or 3 minutes what they received from that, and then they share the information. And that all of a sudden, that adds about 10 minutes to each point. And right there, that could be a 60-minute or even a 75-minute talk without even really changing much content at all. And so I wanted to give you a quick little example there is when you start to format it and break it down and start to go like, okay, what am I going to do here? What am I going to do there? And sometimes, in the beginning, you're not quite sure, well, how long is that going to take? Obviously, I've done it before, so, I can get an idea of like, okay, here's roughly what it's going to take. So you can, if you can't figure that out yourself, just do the best you can breaking it down. Practice it out loud. If you're going to tell a story and time yourself, right? Film yourself. This goes back to the stuff I talked about at the beginning of the call is, when you're practicing filming yourself, time yourself, those types of things. And how long does it take you, And you can start to get a better idea for that. Or you can simply talk to someone who's, like myself, who's done events and can help work with you to kind of decide, oh, it's going to take a lot more than you think it is. I've gotten some outlines from my clients of the talks that they're going to give. They're like spent a lot of time outlining it and stuff, and I'm like, wow, you've got a 30-minute talk, and like you've got enough content to probably do like a half day. You know what I mean? And it's like, let's back this off and like let's whittle this down to like, these 2 points, and elaborate from there. Tell me your story. What's the story you can give with that, and helping it through like that. So that's where you can start to understand of. Maybe breaking it down a little bit more. And ultimately what that does is it just makes you less overwhelmed because you've got a plan and a structure for it. And you keep doing the pieces. And just remember, whenever you get a time frame, it's never bad if you end early. And if you're going over time, you just kind of adapt in the moment of starting to figure out like what those are some contingency plans. What if I only get halfway in this content? What am I going to do? Like those are some things to start to think about. But if you finish early, it's never a bad thing to finish early. I mean, if you got a 2-hour spot and you finish in an hour, well, maybe you need to do something else. But finding that time where being in that moment, there's no better thing, especially as a coach. Where if I had an extra hour, we could do open dialogue, we can do some live coaching, we could break people into groups and do an activity. So having some of those things, some of those ideas ready to go, always leaving that space for interaction is the best thing as a coach. If I'm mentoring you and we're going to be helping you planning out an event for yourself as a coach, remember the number one reason why we speak is it's helping people, but ultimately they're going to get a much better idea of who we are, how we can assist them, and that's going to lead to us getting more clients that way. And so the more time we have for live interaction and even live in the moment coaching, that's the best space to be in, because that's going to allow people to really go, wow, this person's great, or wow, they really listen to people, wow, they really understand how this works, or I can start to see myself working with them. I can start to see how they could help me if I were to work with them. Because you're showcasing coaching and they're experiencing it live. That's the best spot to be. So the less content you have and the more of that you have, the better off that you're at.